Okay, guys, welcome to Base Gardening. So whoops, almost fell over there. The compost behind me here finished the 18-day Berkeley compost method 8 days ago, and so it has now been 26 days because I let it go 8 more days. And what I did was I came out and I flipped it 4 days after the 18-day Berkeley compost method ended, and then it's now sat an additional 4 days, and I finally feel like comfortable with saying the whole hot compost 18-day compost method has officially pretty much come to an end. But what I am going to do is kind of wind it down. I'm not going to just like dump it onto this tarp and then just let it sit there and dry and just stop doing its thing altogether. What I'm going to do now is I'm not going to worry about like really counting the days anymore. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to dump it out and put the bit that was on the bottom in last, so it becomes the top. I'm not going to worry about separating, making the inside go to the outside, and all that's done. All that's part of the 18-day Berkeley compost method, and we're done with that. But it does still have a decent amount of moisture inside it. Actually, it's pretty good amount of water, and so I'm just going to come out every 4 or 5 days. I'm not really going to count. I'm going to come out every 4 or 5 days, and I'm just going to dump it out on the tarp, and then just dump it right back in, except for the top is going to become the bottom, and that's all I'm going to concentrate on, is just simply basically rotating it. That way all the water will go down, and eventually there will be, that's the method I'm going to use to let the composting finish and to dry it out, instead of just dumping it out on this tarp and drying it in a lot of, like, in full sunlight. I'm going to let it dry gradually, and it'll finish composting by that method. So that's what I'm going to do. It is going to continue to compost, and I'm not going to add any more water, and it will eventually dry out by this method. It might take another, I don't know, 8 to 10 to 15 days. So let me talk a little bit about like where this compost is now and what the 18-day Berkeley compost method gets you. After the 18-day, 20-day, whatever Berkeley compost method that you do not have full compost that you just mix into your soil and then just go, that's compost. What you do have that it's really good for is to use as a top dressing. And so when you use it as a top dressing, it means that you mix something else up that's your soil, okay? And then you take you put that in your pot or your whatever, your raised garden bed or your regular garden or whatever you're using, and you stick with your main soil mixed with some other kind of compost for that, okay? But then what you do is you use this new compost as a top dressing. You come along and you just put a layer of it on top, and what it'll do as a layer on top is it'll gradually break down into your soil, and then at that time, once it fully breaks down and goes into your soil, it'll become full compost. And the other thing that'll do is, because this does still have little bits of dried grass in it, it's going to help to protect against weed growth, okay? So that's another thing that it's really, really good for. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and dump it out and talk a little bit more about what's going on from there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, the way I have the compost laid out there, just in that line, I'm just going to dump it back in like that, starting with that end first, because that's what was on top and came out first. And this coming down this way is what was on the bottom, which will now go in last. Okay, so let's talk a bit about this compost here. Let me bring it up to the camera. Look at that. There's still a little bit of dry banana leaf right there. A little bit of some other kind of leaf. You can make out like a little bit of dried grass there, but I mean, other than that, look at how brown this is. Look at how brown and black this is overall, and the smell. This smells like dirt. That's one of the biggest indicators. This no longer smells at all like grass. I mean, it's barely there.
just does not smell like grass anymore. And you can see how broken down. This is why it's ready to become a top dressing. Okay, there's still little bits like this. You know, it can go on top, and it'll break down and become full, beautiful compost, like 100% composted later on. So the smell, right? Let me give it a smaller handful. The moisture that's still in there, still about that much. So that needs to dry out. Okay. Okay. You also will find clumps that stick together like this, and they just, something's holding them together. They just want to be together. They're little like pockets of heat as well. Eventually, you know, all this stuff will just break down, or you can separate it yourself like I'm doing here, you know.
The very last indicator that I want to talk to you about before I put this back in and wrap the video up, the very last indicator was that when I finished the 18-day compost, there was still a good amount of heat. Whenever I came out and checked the compost, there was still a good amount of heat inside, which is the reason that I decided to just need to go for longer. And I needed to, and I'm continuing to just let it go for longer in a roundabout way. But there's still some heat in there. But the reason that I decided to call this pretty much an officially done compost that I'm going to stop tending to in any way that resembles an 18-day Berkeley compost, apart from just doing what I'm going to do here, the heat finally began to subside. It went from having that like burning hot sensation kind of feel to still having heat but slacking off. And that's when I knew that the process was finally almost done. That was the biggest indicator. You've got the color, you've got the smell, but when you still got the heat, then it's still composting, and it needs to compost more. And the only thing that needs to happen that allows it to become full 100% compost when you would buy at the store is just more time. It just happens over time, but the 18-day Berkeley compost method kickstarts that time and gives it a huge advantage, so that instead of taking like a year or over a year or whatever of slowly breaking down, most of it happens in 18 days, and then the rest of it may take some number of weeks or months more, but you're not looking at like a year and a half to have compost. It's not going to take nearly that long at all. The other thing you might be able to tell is, if you saw earlier videos, you might notice how much bigger this compost pile is. It broke down so much. It's like half the size that it was before now. You know, before it was took up about the same length of the tarp, but it was mounded up, you know, 2 or 3 feet high or something. It was much higher. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and dump this back in and be done with this compost for today. And I'll just come out and I'll do the same thing in another 4 or 5 days until I feel no heat in it. And then once the moisture's out and there's no heat anymore, I will just lay it out exactly like this, maybe spread it out a little bit more in the middle of the hot sun, in the middle of the day in the hot sun, and just let it completely dry out. And then I can just go around and easily add it to anything because it'll be dry. And once it's dry, I'll probably also break it up, which wouldn't work now because it's still wet, but when I break it up, it'll kind of look like this. If you imagine that it's dry, if you imagine that it's dry and more breakable and will break into finer pieces, I'll just kind of break it up like that, and it'll kind of turn it into more like something that looks a little bit more like dirt. All right, guys, and there we have it. That's it. Yeah, so 4 or 5 days, I come out and do that again. Wait another 4, 5, 6 days. Come out, do it again until there's finally no more moisture in it, or very little, and then I'll just lay it all out on the tarp and just let it fully dry until it becomes like the consistency of dirt, and then I'll just kind of break it all up. and then I'll be ready to spread it on top of anything as a topsoil. It'll just break down into your soil, and it'll just mix in, and it'll be like you mix compost into your soil, which will be a really, really good thing. So remember to find me on BitChute and Rumble. I'm probably going to start doing live streams on Rumble once I'm going to kind of like figure out what I could make regular live streams about. Maybe if any of you have any ideas, leave them in the comments. Something, I'm gonna have to pick something. I mean, I've got like this gardening slash very bizarre gardening slash flat earth channel, and I haven't, like, the live streaming on Rumble is now, you know, free to everybody. It used to be a paid subscription. It works really well, it's really good. I'm just not quite sure what I'm going to live stream about, and that's my hang up. So if you got any ideas for that, leave them in the comments below. Find me on BitChute and Rumble, especially look out for, once I figure it out, look out for Rumble live streams. And yeah, that's about all. Thanks everybody. Base Garden.